In 1980, one of rock's most incendiary frontmen died under tragic and mysterious circumstances. He missed his band's big break by just a matter of months. His replacement, another iconic rocker, he then picked up the pieces and helped pen the second biggest record in history. Yet questions linger about how much of the album he actually wrote, following the trail of a supposed 40-year cover-up. Today we examine the testimonies of bandmates, girlfriends, and confidants to uncover the authorship of one of rock's most explosive tracks. So are we talking far-fetched conspiracy theories here, or is there really something to all of this? Find out next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. If you want the real stories behind the soundtrack of your life, make sure that you subscribe below right now. Among the hundreds of interviews and videos, you'll dig this channel. There's so much here that you won't find really anywhere else. 1979 and 1980 were an emotional roller coaster for AC/DC. Over the course of just 12 months, the group went from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows. One of those peaks was in July of 79 when the band released their sixth album, Highway to Hell. This landmark record went to number 17 in the US, number 13 in Australia, and number 8 in the UK, and produced their highest charting single up to that point, Highway to Hell, which went to number 4 in the British charts, one of the greatest rock songs of all time. AC/DC was poised for a huge commercial breakout after the success of Highway to Hell. Everybody knew it, too, especially in the US. Prior to its release, though, the band had received very little airplay in America, and their US label, Atlantic Records, had given them really paltry marketing support. They even rejected their 1976 album, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, for domestic distribution. Now, to remedy the situation, legendary producer Mutt Lange was brought on board and would go on to produce Highway to Hell, also Back in Black, and for those about to rock, we salute you. At first, brothers Angus and Malcolm Young were angry about Mutt Lange, feeling that Atlantic was disrespecting their older brother George, who had co-produced their previous albums. They were great records.
'Cause I'm TNT, I'm dynamite. It's a long way to the top if you wanna rock and roll.
But the band ultimately acquiesced, and Mutt worked his sonic sorcery to help the band create catchier, more accessible songs for radio. The plan worked very well. Highway to Hell became AC/DC's bestseller in the US up to that point. But then the roller coaster hit rock bottom on February 19, 1980, when frontman Bon Scott was found dead in a friend's car in London after a heavy night of partying. Now, the official cause of death was classified as alcohol poisoning and death by misadventure. The loss of Bon Scott was absolutely crushing. Not only had AC/DC lost their charismatic lead singer, but also their primary lyricist over 6 studio albums. Irreplaceable, really. Bon's close friends and family, particularly his father, though, encouraged AC/DC to forge ahead without him, so the band began their hunt for a frontman following Bon's funeral. Auditions began to find a replacement for Scott, and some notable candidates vied for the gig. There was Slade's Noddy Holder. Reportedly, he was offered the job, but he turned it down. However, Malcolm and Angus remembered Bon talking about a singer who had really impressed him. His name was Brian Johnson. He had fronted a band called Geordie. We've talked about this before. Scott had caught a performance in London back in the mid-70s and recounted to the brothers Brian's highly charged stage presence. He was electric, writhing on the stage floor, kicking and screaming, even carrying the band's guitarist on his shoulders through the audience.
Trying to patch up your world, which was broken into.
All of the remaining AC/DC crew and producer Mutt Lange agreed that Brian should take up Bon's mantle. After an audition, Brian gladly accepted the gig. Now, the band made the official announcement on April 1st, 1980. That was less than a month and a half after Bon's death. AC/DC's next album, Back in Black, was composed by the combined efforts Brian Johnson, Angus, and Malcolm Young, and it took about 6 weeks to write. It was recorded between April and May of 1980 at Compass Point Studios in the Bahamas. Following the album's completion, the group mixed Back in Black at Electric Lady Studios, New York City, and then they released the record on July 25th, 1980. The record's all-black cover was designed as a sign of mourning for Bon Scott. And although Mutt Lange thought it was too bleak, the band members insisted on the darkened sleeve. It was a great choice. With the release of Back in Black, the band's roller coaster ride reached its highest pinnacle up to that point. This historic LP not only overtook Highway to Hell as the band's best-selling album, but it beat out every other album ever made globally, except for one. Selling over 50 million copies. Only Michael Jackson's Thriller has sold more, with roughly 70 million. Now, some say that Thriller's sold as high as 120 million, but who knows? After its completion, AC/DC supported the album with a year-long world tour, cementing them among the most popular music acts of the early 80s. Now, since that time, of course, their legacy has only snowballed, with every one of their 11 Brian Johnson albums breaking the top 5 somewhere in the world, including 7 number ones. Add to that 16 top 10 hits in the U.S. mainstream rock charts. And there's just no denying the post-Bon Scott era has been very good to AC/DC. But Back in Black, that's really what kicked all of this off. The album includes 10 tracks, all of which have passed into legend, really. And it featured 4 singles: Hell's Bells, Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution, Back in Black, and today's song that we're going to go in depth on, You Shook Me All Night Long. We've covered it a little bit, but I want to cover it from the aspect of who really wrote it. Okay, how do I say this without going overboard? You Shook Me All Night Long is simply one of the most undeniable jams of all time. It's the ultimate party tune. I mean, it just fires you up with an uncontrollable urge to rock. And this song is an example of superior musicianship across the board. Angus Young is irrepressible. His guitar solo is a heart-rupturing, face-melting onslaught that has become the stuff of legend. And although there will only be one Bon Scott, the vocal performance by Brian Johnson on Shook Me effectively began his legacy as one of the most distinctive rock vocals of all time. It's like he drank a bunch of kerosene before he sang the vocal. It's so gritty. It's so street smart. It's incredible. As we look into the mystery behind this song's lyrics, I do want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear. One of the best things about Zenni is their frames are so cost effective. You can own so many pairs for what just one pair would cost elsewhere. You can have every color and shape there. You got to check it out today at Zenni.com. You're going to find something you like. You Shook Me All Night Long was the first single from Back in Black, but as massive as this seismic rocker is to generations of music fans across the world, it might surprise you to know that it barely broke the top 40 on Billboard's Hot 100. It stalled at number 35. How's that possible? It's criminal. Like I said, we covered it several years back, giving it our number 1 in our hearts award. Speaking of which, of all the classic songs that AC/DC has given us to rock out to, they've never made it higher than number 23 on the Hot 100. Their biggest hit is Money Talks, 1990, went to number 23. Back in Black went to number 37. Thunderstruck didn't even make the list. Head scratchers for sure. But that wouldn't be the only mystery surrounding You Shook Me All Night Long, the chart position. Just like the suspicious circumstances of Bon Scott's death, there is also controversy surrounding the origin of this landmark song. Now, officially, it is credited as a co-write between Angus, Malcolm, and Brian. However, several sources close to the band claim the song's lyrics were actually written by Bon Scott, citing that the lyrics closely resemble Bon's writing style, especially the double entendres that were his trademark technique. Others have also asserted that Bon's influence goes beyond You Shook Me All Night Long to other songs on Back in Black. But for the scope of this video, we're just going to really put You Shook Me All Night Long under the microscope. Now, as we get into this, I do want to acknowledge that there are some really strong feelings about this subject. So in the interest of showing respect to all the members of AC/DC and their fans across the world, I'm just going to present the testimonies from both sides of the divide, and then you can draw your own circumstances, your own conclusions. I don't have a dog in the fight. It's a great song. I don't care who wrote it. So let's start with the band. AC/DC has always maintained their own exclusive authorship on all Back in Black's tracks, and that Bon had no role on the album except for a drum jam session on some barely formed song ideas. Bassist Cliff Williams, interviewed back in 2007, denied that Bon had anything to do with Back in Black. He said, no. That was all, lyrically from Brian Johnson's influence from when he came into the band. And according to the band's standard narrative, You Shook Me All Night Long was written while they were recording in the Bahamas. After about 3 days there, I guess Angus and Malcolm played Brian a very basic riff and presented him with the title, Shook Me All Night Long. They said the song was inspired by scantily clad American girls there on the beaches in the Bahamas. On the Howard Stern show back in 2011, Johnson talked about writing You Shook Me All Night Long, saying it was the first song he wrote for the album. This is where me passion with cars comes in, he said. The first line I wrote goes, she was a fast machine, she kept her motor clean. She was a fast machine, she kept her motor clean. She was a fast... And I give it to Mal the next morning, and he's like, are you writing about cars? I go, no. And he said, no worries, mate. Sounds great. One of the greatest opening lines from a song ever, I might add. Brian said the next day after he heard their first rough mix, he proclaimed it was the best rock and roll song that he'd ever heard in his life. And Malcolm had to agree. You could be right, mate. That's what he said. On another occasion, Brian said, I don't believe in spirits and that, but something happened to me that night in that room. Something washed through me and went, it's all right, son, it's all right. This is kind of calm. I'd like to think it was Bon Scott, but I can't because I'm too cynical. He went on to say, there's something happened to him. I just started writing the song. After that, he sat down with a blank piece of paper, and within about 15 minutes, he had written the song. When asked what he thought of people suggesting Bon was involved in the writing of the lyrics on Back in Black, he said, bollocks. That's a load of bollocks. I can tell you that Bon hadn't even gone into the studio to even rehearse with the lads. He was getting ready to work on the lyrics when he died. But Bon Scott biographer Jesse Fink has come to a very different conclusion about the authorship of You Shook Me All Night Long. I was actually reading his book on Bon. That's what inspired me to do this piece. The writer is of the opinion that the former frontman contributed to multiple tracks on Back in Black. And in the book, he sets out to prove it. Collecting several testimonies from people that were close to Bon Scott, Fink crafts a narrative in direct opposition to what Brian Johnson and company have said over the years. These witnesses proclaim that without a doubt, Bon Scott wrote, at least in part, the lyrics for You Shook Me All Night Long. Unfortunately, current and past members of AC/DC would not speak to Fink about these claims, so he had to rely on their past statements about the authorship of the song, which he calls contradictory and unconvincing. If you want to get into that aspect of the story, I would refer you to the book. But what I'm interested to hear are the witnesses that Fink did interview, particularly ex-lovers and close friends. Australian Margaret Silver Smith, one of the great loves of Bon's life, She said, I know for sure that Shook Me was written at my flat in Gloucester Road in Kensington, London. This was back in 76. She told me to come, but I was already there. He wrote that in a letter to somebody. One of his grotty mates, just after we got together. He always kept notebooks and added and subtracted to them and so on. He put in American Thighs even way back then, because that was the market they were going to try and crack. So that was written a long time ago. End of quote. Now, the subject of keeping notebooks is an important one for Bond's case. Girlfriends and friends alike have spoken of notebooks filled with poetry and lyrics, that Bond Scott carried around with him. Bond himself once said, I've got pages of stuff, and out of it might come, 3 or 4 good ideas for songs. Bandmate Angus Young said back in 1983 that Bond used to come into the studio with poems and things he used to write. And when me and Malcolm were fooling around with this riff for this song, he said, I think I've got something that would fit in there quite nicely. Now, according to Bond's girlfriend, Patty Bishop, the music was typically ready before Bond wrote the lyrics. Writing was his contribution, and back when the Youngs had no interest in the writing. Also of note, she said his songs all had a story behind them. Bond thought the lyrics were funny because they all came from a real story. Over the years, the members of AC/DC have maintained that there was no notebook with lyrics for the album Back in Black. But the author Jesse Fink doesn't buy it, saying, so we're to believe that Bond changed the habit of years and had nothing doodled on paper, nothing prepared, nothing written down, no titles at all when he was about to start recording Back in Black. Now, another one of Bon Scott's girlfriends, American photographer and model with the pseudonym Holly X, she believed it was likely that Bond wrote at least some of You Shook Me All Night Long as well. She actually cited the line sightless eyes as the evidence. According to Holly, she saw the original lyric and it was actually chartreuse eyes, which according to Bon Scott was the color of her eyes, which were green. I guess one time when she and Bond were sitting out in the sun behind Miami's Newport Hotel, he turned to her and he said, your eyes are chartreuse. Now, having no idea what chartreuse was, she thought it was something bad, like bright pink or some ghastly color. She said Bond would refer to her eye color with that word many times. Fink believes that the line sightless eyes lyrically makes no sense and wonders if the band changed the line because no one knew what chartreuse meant. Had Bond penned lyrics to You Shook Me All Night Long, it doesn't seem completely implausible that the Youngs and Brian Johnson might have changed Bond's original wording, wherein anything too clever or likely to go over the heads of fans was removed or modified. That was what his justification was. Robin Custer, Holly's best friend at the time, she was dating Bond, 100% believes that Bond wrote You Shook Me All Night Long. He used to say that about her all the time. He said, the girl shook my world. He used to say, this girl shook my world, she shook my world. Yeah, there's not a doubt in my mind. Now, I can't cite all the witnesses that Jesse Fink interviewed here, but a lot come forward in support of Bond's authorship. I'll just touch on a few more of Bond's friends. An AC/DC booking agent, Doug Thaler, who said, you can bet your life that Bon Scott wrote the lyrics to You Shook Me All Night Long. It's Bon Scott's lyrics all over the place. Another friend, Roy Allen, said, I don't see any way he could not have contributed to that album. They started recording it less than 2 months after he died. Whether the band admits it or not, it is fairly obvious to me that Bond contributed to at least some of the songs on Back in Black. End of quote. And there's also music journalist Malcolm Dome, who claims that shortly before he died, Bond actually showed him his notebook of lyrics and some of the lines that would make it onto Back in Black, including You Shook Me All Night Long. The part where he says, she told me to come, but I was already there. He said, I saw it written down. There were lyrics, lines used on Back in Black that Bond wrote, but he wasn't credited, and to this day, no one's really sure what happened. I don't think he even got close to finishing the whole song, but there are lines in there that I know are Bonds.
She told me to come, but I was already there.
So there are the two sides of the story. Brian Johnson and Malcolm and Angus, if they're saying that that's what happened, I tend to believe them. But what are your thoughts? What do you really think happened? Let us know in the comments below. I think it's interesting to talk about. Of course, Bon Scott's legacy is all over Back in Black, whether or not he wrote the lyrics. A quick reminder as we keep going through this, we release content 6 days a week here. Our aim is to get as many interviews as possible to tell the stories behind the song straight from the artist. The best support that we can get in order to accomplish that mission is your support through Patreon. That helps us keep this a daily channel, and then we give you exclusives. Click on the link below to check that out. We appreciate it. You Shook Me All Night Long has appeared in several movies and TV shows, of course, including WKRP in Cincinnati, 1980, Private Parts in 97, A Knight's Tale in 2001, The Sopranos in 2001, Brothers and Sisters in 2006, Mike and Molly in 2011, New Girl in 2012, and Supernatural. You Shook Me has also been covered by Paul Schaefer in 93, and Aerosmith Steven Tyler sang along with AC/DC at their induction in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That was cool. Other covers include Shania Twain in 2004, Tori Amos in 2005, Corey Taylor, Lizzie Hill in 2012. Billy Joel with the help of Brian Johnson did in 2014. Axl Rose teamed up with AC/DC in 2016 to do it. Panic at the Disco's done it. Melissa Etheridge. Blues Traveler. Did I miss anybody? So many covers. I also need to give a shout out to my buddy Jess Harnell and his band Rock Sugar, incredibly talented voice actor and musician. Jess put together a mashup of You Shook Me All Night Long and Madonna's Like a Prayer. It's called Shook Me Like a Prayer. Really cool. Check that out. Okay, so in conclusion, after comparing the testimonies, I don't think we'll ever definitively know what happened there. But there are several indisputable facts here. Number one, Back in Black is the biggest selling rock album of all time. Number two, Back in Black was much more than a tribute to Bon. It couldn't have existed without Bon Scott, regardless of whether his lyrics appeared on the album. And three, in the end, this song stands the test of time. As much of AC/DC's catalog, it will outlive every band member as well as you and I. That's just the truth. Okay, I'm ready to bring it on. Leave us a comment about AC/DC and You Shook Me All Night Long. Who do you think wrote this rocker? Johnson, Scott, or maybe a combination of band members? Let's get a discussion going. I think it'll be fun. If you enjoyed this episode, you're not finished yet because there's a lot more AC/DC where this came from. Back in Black, Highway to Hell, Thunderstruck. We've got the stories of the songs. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on our interviews or our content. We're bringing you deep dives, exclusive interviews, and nostalgic countdowns on a daily basis here. You're going to love it. Check us out on Patreon. Check out our merch as well. Help us keep the music alive. That's the idea. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.